Welcome once again to the official MUFON podcast. I'm your host, Richard Beckwith. Tonight, my guest is Paul Davids, a film producer and director, writer, artist, and magician. He became fascinated with making movies as a young boy and won the first Monsters of Filmland magazine amateur movie contest when he was just 14 years old. And he became a protege of the late Forrest Ackerman. He attended Princeton University and won a number of writing awards, including the F. Scott Fitzgerald Prize for Literature. He kept an animation stand in his dorm room to film cartoons. After Princeton, he was accepted as one of the first 15 fellowship students at the highly prestigious American Film Institute Center for Advanced Film Studies in Beverly Hills, California. He was the executive producer and co-writer for Showtime's Roswell in 1994 and went on to produce, write, and direct almost a dozen independent films, dramas, or comedies. Many of them feature documentaries like The Sci-Fi Boys. I could go on and on because his experience is vast and absolutely fascinating. I can't tell you how honored I am to have him here with me today. Paul Davids, welcome to the MUFON podcast.
Hi, good to be with you, Richard.
I really appreciate you being here. I thought about you last night when I was watching Queen of Blood. Do you remember that movie?
I don't remember that one.
It had Forrest Ackerman in it. I saw a lot of the horror
movies.
It had Forrest Ackerman in it. And it was about, it had John Saxon, and it was about this alien that they picked up on Mars that was a female alien, and she turned out to be like a flesh-eating vampire, But Forrest Ackerman was one of the actors in the movie, and he really kind of reminded me of like a Christopher Lee. Did he have that kind of countenance about him?
Well, it sounds interesting. I mean, I think we've got enough flesh-eating vampires around, but anything with Forrest J Ackerman must have some redeeming quality.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about Forrest Ackerman here in just a minute, but before we do that, I want to talk about your background, your educational background, and what led you to becoming a filmmaker.
Well, I started making films when I was fifth or sixth grader in elementary school. We didn't have video. I'm talking about the late 1950s. And we had 8mm cameras. I was lucky enough to be able to get one that had a stop motion feature, which meant you could take one frame at a time. That way you could do stop motion animation, which is the key to most of the special effects we were doing back then with dragons and dinosaurs, articulated models. So I'd always been making films and really liked the special effects films. I also did animated cartoons. When I was in college, I was doing that in 16mm. And I went to university at Princeton. I have a degree in psychology from Princeton. I was pre-med, which means I almost became a doctor, but I came to my senses after applying to medical school and getting accepted and then deciding, wait a minute, I think I have another life ahead of me, because I always passionately wanted a profession in film. It became possible when I applied to and was accepted to the American Film Institute's Center for Advanced Film Studies. This was a really big deal. It was the first year, 1969, first year of their program. They only accepted 18 students from all around the world on fellowship, complete and total fellowship. There was no fee. In fact, they put up production money for me and the other students to make our first 16mm sound film with actors. And that really got things started. I was one of the very fortunate ones to be accepted, partially on the basis of the amateur films I'd made that were kind of interesting and different from ones that other kids were making then. And my writing, I won 3 writing awards while I was at Princeton. And the dean of the school, who was from Czechoslovakia, well, I guess it was the Czech Republic at that time, František Daniel, he loved my stories and he saw real potential in me. And George Stevens Jr. gave me the nod to join that first class. And from there, it took a long time. Doors opened. first thing was I got to meet so many of my heroes in the world of Hollywood filmmaking while I was there. And that included George Powell, the great producer of, he was the first George Lucas, let's say. You know, He made films like the original War of the Worlds and Conquest of Space, When Worlds Collide, Destination Moon. He made The Time Machine and fantasy films like Tom Thumb, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm. He took an interest in me, and that was wonderful. He even had me write a first treatment for The Hobbit, which he wanted to make. But we were way ahead of our time on that. It didn't happen until years later with Peter Jackson, who years later I was fortunate enough to meet, and he helped me make my film, The Sci-Fi Boys.
Wow.
It's a long answer to your question.
Right. Well, that was leading up to Forrest Ackerman and how you got to a relationship with Forrest Ackerman. And explain to the audience, if you would please, who was Forrest Ackerman?
We called him Forry Ackerman, Forrest J Ackerman. He was the editor of, the first editor and one of the creators with his publisher James Warren of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. It started in 1958. That magazine, there was nothing like it. And I was, about a 10-year-old kid at that time, and it was just perfect for my age. It spoke to me. I loved the magazine. Only problem was my parents wouldn't let me read it. They were afraid it was going to give me nightmares. I had to go to my friend Jeff Tinsley's house. His parents didn't mind, so I read his copies. But we grew to just respect and adore Forrest J Ackerman, the editor, who in Hollywood had an incredible collection of memorabilia from all of the early science fiction and horror films. He was a scholar, he was the expert, and he had a personality that was very endearing to fans. As a matter of fact, we didn't have internet then. We had no way to communicate with other young filmmakers and fans, but his magazine had a section called Graveyard Examiner where you could write in and you could meet other people that were making amateur 8mm movies, and developed a group of friends that included Dennis Muren. My gosh, Dennis Muren, who went on to win 8 Academy Awards. He revolutionized the whole world of special effects. And Rick Baker. Fari called him Rick Baker Monster Maker. He's also won about 8 or 10 Academy Awards now, and Leonard Maltin, the great critic, and others, David Allen. So to have had contact with these people as a child, we were all growing up, we all wanted to do the same thing. It was wonderful. Fari was the ringleader. I met Fari, I must have been in junior high school. There was a World Science Fiction Convention in Washington, D.C. at the Statler Hilton Hotel. My friend Jeff Tinsley, his father, took us down there. He said, "You boys have to meet this man, Fari Ackerman. You love his magazine." Jeff's father had read that Fari was going to be down there at the Statler Hilton. So he took us down. We met Fari, and we just gushed out for Fari all the news about these 8mm monster movies we'd been making. Hey, Fari, we got a brontosaurus. You should see the dragon I made. I even made a sea serpent. His name is Glarf. Well, Fari said, "This sounds really interesting. Can you come back tomorrow? Bring your 8mm films. Let's show them right here in this conference room, the Statler Hilton. There are going to be other fans here. They'd all like to see them." It was a day burned into my memory. We showed him the films. His publisher, James Warren, said, "Send us stills from your films. You'll get published in Famous Monsters." And that's what happened. And then we won their we were honorable mention winners in their amateur filmmaking contest. So here I am. I'm 13 years old, and I'm convinced I'm a future major Hollywood producer, okay? No one could get that idea out of my mind. Yeah. And that explains a lot of what corrupted me. And I loved Fari, and then corresponded with him. When I won their award, he wrote me a letter. The envelope said, "To master movie maker Paul Davids." Now, here I am, 13 or 14 years old, getting a letter from my idol in Hollywood calling me a master movie maker. Come on, my head was so swelled,
I can see the excitement in your face.
I I never lost these formative memories. And then, at Princeton, I was waylaid from all of this a lot. I studied. I learned a lot. I was a summer work abroad student in Paris while I was at Princeton. My French was fluent enough, and they put me in a department store there called Au Printemps. My job was selling cameras to tourists. Movie cameras, 8mm. Who better could they get?
Yeah.
So that was the beginning. But I must say that breaking into the business after film school was very frustrating, and it took a long time. And I started at the bottom. Some of my friends started at the top. I mean, Jeremy Kagan, who was in my class, he started directing for Columbo within a year of finishing the film school. And then there was David Lynch. He was in my class, and then there was Terrence Malick. He was in my class. Tom Rickman. They got started way before I did. I don't know what was wrong with me, but see, after a few years, I got a first lucky break. They say you want to work in this business, you got to get a break. How do you get a break? Well, first of all, you've got to get close to someone who's established in the business, who respects you and thinks you have talent and is motivated to want to help you. And then it doesn't matter how you start, because you meet people, you make connections, and then you find opportunities open up. But it took a long time for me. I didn't, I was about 40 years old when Marvel Productions hired me to be the production coordinator for all of the Transformer cartoons. 79 Transformer cartoons. I was involved. All the recording sessions. I was with all of the top voice guys in the program. But it took till I was 40. I graduated film school at about 24. I worked first. My first break really was with Hollywood agent Paul Kohner. Now, Paul Kohner was a great legend. He came over from Europe with William Wyler, the great director of Ben-Hur. They were buddies. They were roommates. Carl Laemmle, the founder of Universal Pictures, brought them over. And, Paul Kohner was a producer for a while. He married Lupita Tovar, the Mexican actress, and he actually produced her in the Spanish language version of Dracula. When they were making the original Dracula, with Bela Lugosi, they filmed that during the day, and at night, Paul Kohner took over the same sets, and they did it in Spanish. He produced a bunch of movies. He was a key man on The Man Who Laughs. And then he decided that agenting was what he really wanted to do. And he became one of the most famous and successful agents in Hollywood. He had clients like John Huston and Charles Bronson. And he took me aboard. I was recommended to him to be a script reader in his office, kind of a general assistant, and at a pretty low salary, but with great enthusiasm. I went into Paul Kohner's office every day, and every day was a great adventure for me. The scripts I was reading, the top actors I was connected with because of Paul Kohner. So finally, then I get more breaks. I got to join the Writers Guild when Cornell Wilde offered me a writing assignment. And then Paul Kohner got me writing deals, script writing deals. It paid enough for me to get a Cadillac back then, a used gold Cadillac. But his deal with me was, Paul, because of the Writers Guild, you're going to be making like 5 times as much on one screenwriting deal as I'm paying you. He said, but the only way I'm going to get you these deals, you got to promise you're still going to work for me full time, same salary, and you can write these scripts at night and on the weekend on your own time, That's what it was. So for 5 years, I'm in the swim of the golden years of Hollywood, and it was great. But I so much wanted to direct, and the scripts I was writing weren't getting made. I was getting paid, but they weren't getting produced. And then that came to an end. But within a couple years of when it came to an end, pretty quickly I got aboard F. Lee Bailey's show, Lie Detector, as a segment producer. I was hired. My first producing Well, I was production coordinator. And it wasn't long after that closed down. It was very interesting, by the way, for MUFON people. We had Betty Hill on that show, the great Betty Hill. It was one of my first exposures to UFOs because I didn't know anything from UFOs in those days. You know, I wasn't educated about it. I had no reason to be a believer because, you know, I just thought it was fiction. Wonderful.
Is this the point at which you began to become interested in UFOs, around the time that Betty Hill appeared?
No. You know, because I kind of overlooked her segment, which another segment producer was doing, and I thought, that's interesting. I thought one equally interesting with psychic from New Jersey, Dorothy Allison, which got me onto the psychic thing about communication with the deceased, because I was seeing things with my own eyes happening there. And her background was incredible. But no, UFOs, that started at about 4:03 in the afternoon of February 25th, 1987. That is the minute that I became a devout believer.
I'm assuming you're going to tell us why.
The reason was I was working at home then. My stint on the Transformers had recently come to an end, and I was writing a script that then later I made into a movie called Starry Night. But my daughter was home from school, and she was up on the second floor of our house, and she screamed at me, "Daddy, get upstairs right now, quick, I see a flying saucer." Okay? So I thought, she's interrupted me 4 times this afternoon. I'm trying to write a flying saucer. What? Come on. She should know what a Goodyear blimp is. That must be what it is. No, Daddy, that's not a blimp. It's not a blimp. It's a flying saucer. Get up here. Get up here. I ran up the stairs, colliding with my 6-year-old son. My daughter was 9. She points out the window, and in broad daylight, there's a flying saucer. All right? It's descending from a cloud above us. I'm looking out her window. It's a perfect dome-shaped classical flying saucer. Dull gray, didn't have any portholes. We opened her window. We walked out on the roof. It descended closer and closer, like it saw us. It got within 500 feet of us.
Oh, my gosh.
And that afternoon, I, Paul J. Davids, became a witness to something real. Flying saucer, they're called. Unidentified flying object. This defied the conventional laws of aviation. You know, there was no exhaust, no jet exhaust or anything like that, no propellers, no sound. It was silent. And I knew that I couldn't leave my kids there on the roof and run and get my camera. Besides, I knew I'd have to reload my camera. So the only thing I could do was stand there. It was minutes in daylight and just be the best witness I could. Later, I wrote down notes. I interviewed my kids to get their impressions of what we saw. And I began reading books about UFOs. That was February 25th. And in the months that followed, I just devoured hundreds of books about UFOs. I wanted to know everything I could. And I felt motivated at that point. And this motivation really carried me forward in my career because we got the movie Roswell out of this. I'd never seen the saucer. Showtime they never would have made the movie Roswell. It took me years to get it made, but I felt like I was given an assignment in that experience, that I had a responsibility now because I knew something that most of my contemporaries did not know, that these things are real. And I soon enough found out that there was a deliberate official effort to suppress any knowledge about this or acknowledgement of the truth of it. So, yes, I became a sort of crusader at that point. I stuck my neck out. I told everyone that they're real. I've seen it. The government is lying to you. They're all lying to you.
Can I ask you a question about your sighting?
Yeah.
How long did this object stay, and how did it leave?
It stayed minutes. I don't know exactly how many, but it was 3 or 4 minutes, could have been 5 minutes. And while it was there, when it hovered in a still position, it did a little wobble like this. But when it moved horizontally, it showed more stability. It went between an open space and branches of a tree so that we still had eye contact with it. It seemed like it was deliberately keeping our possibility of seeing it among those leaves. And then, the underside of the craft somehow turned dead black before it departed. Very, very black in broad daylight. It wasn't reflecting any light at all. I want to tell you, a friend had me look at the Billy Meyer pictures in Switzerland. And this was months earlier. I considered them, at that time, I thought they were probably fake. I talked to special effects guys, and one of the guys said, this picture of it hovering over snow in Switzerland, look at the bottom of the craft, he said. It's black. It's dead black. He said, that's not real. They made a mistake in the special effects because there would have been reflected light from the snow. So you would have seen something on the bottom of that craft. So this is bad special effects. Well, before the saucer left me, it did a demonstration, as if it could read my mind as to why I wasn't believing in Billy Meyer and saucers. It turned the underside dead black, just like that photo I didn't believe. And then it turned gray again, and then it swooped down across our valley. We're up high. It flew over these 3 palm trees that are still there. It flew over those trees, and it headed toward the main district of Highland Park, Los Angeles. There was a 3-story brick building. I think it used to be a schoolhouse, and now I think it was sort of tenement housing. I didn't know that then, that it was tenement housing, but that it was approaching that part of Highland Park, and then it was gone. It was just gone. You couldn't see it anymore. It just blinked out as though it had never been there. Now, I had real problem with that concept because at that time I thought, did it suddenly shoot off to the left where it would have been concealed by some other trees while I was blinking, or I wasn't looking? But I was looking. I didn't look away. I was staring at it the whole time. And it vanished. That's the story of that day. And then the rest of the story, I guess, is how it affected me. As I said, I started reading all those books, and I came across the Roswell incident.
Let me ask you about that, Paul. Back again to your experience. You indicated that it sort of changed your perspective because you had seen something that you knew a lot of people had not seen, but you were able to verify that this was a real phenomenon. Do you think in that instance, while you were having that experience, that you might well have received a message from someone or something on a subliminal or subconscious level that got you interested in this, or was it just simply the experience itself that got you interested in the subject?
Richard, I don't know the answer to that question. It's possible what you say happened. The main thing was this exhilaration I felt. I didn't feel any fear in seeing this. I felt it was wonderful seeing it, that, I was getting confirmation that something was real that I had just, sort of seen in fiction. And the intensity of the interest that was aroused after that was, there was something not quite normal about it. I mean, I did become obsessed with the subject. And I wanted to know so much about it, and I reached out to people who I thought were experts who might be able to help me understand what I saw. For example, there was one man who works at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory who had worked on the Mars, one of the early Mars projects. And I don't remember the name of that Mars
Viking,
project.
was it Viking or?
It was an early one. I'm not sure, but he just said, don't ask me about the moon. I'm a Mars man. Okay. And he came to my house, and I walked him through where the whole thing happened. And I said, I guess if this was something from Jet Propulsion Lab and it was classified, you wouldn't be able to tell me. I said, I can't imagine why Jet Propulsion Lab would test something over my neighborhood like that. And he said, well, you're right. If it was classified, I couldn't tell you. He said, but in this case, he said, I am going to tell you, it wasn't anything of ours. We don't have that. We're not doing that. And we wouldn't send anything like that over to your neighborhood. So no, that wasn't what it was. And then my wife knew Robert Wise. She'd worked with him on premieres of, one of his movies. I can't remember which one. But Robert Wise, he directed The Day the Earth Stood Still, The Andromeda Strain, and The Sound of Music, and even West Side Story. But he had this interest in UFOs, and my wife set up a meeting between me and Robert Wise. I went to his office in Beverly Hills. I told him what had happened. He took a great interest. And he told me that he was personally convinced that these things were real. And that while he was making The Day the Earth Stood Still, there were people with credentials who came out from Washington who tipped him off and said, you don't know how close to truth and reality this film you're making actually is. The thing he couldn't understand was the cover-up. There was no cover-up in The Day the Earth Stood Still. It lands near the Washington Monument, and he couldn't understand this idea of keeping something like that secret, because to him it was just something so marvelous and so intriguing and so important for understanding man's place in the universe. How can you decide you're not going to reveal something like that? As a matter of fact, I'll tell you later, when I got to know Ray Bradbury, the science fiction writer, who did not believe in UFOs, I told him Roswell happened, it was real, it happened. He didn't believe it, and I said, why? He said, don't you understand? I'm Ray Bradbury. If it had happened, they would have told me.
Oh, well, isn't that weird, Paul, that there are so many science fiction writers that just are so opposed to the notion of UFOs?
Some of those science fiction writers, I think, have very deep inside contacts and are part of the, Isaac Asimov is a very interesting one. He talks about the vastness of the universe, and there must be many, many civilizations out there. But have they visited us? Seriously doubt it. Well, they have. I'm here to tell you they have. They're here. Our government, at certain levels, has known about this forever, and they won't talk. The presidents won't talk. I think some of them really wish they could, but they kind of indicate they're being restrained. I mean, Donald Trump has had a few interesting sentences to say about it. And then a couple of presidents went on the Jimmy Kimmel show, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. I heard Hillary Clinton was even with Jimmy Kimmel on this, but I never saw that one. But,
discussion about that subject was a major part of the leaked emails of the Hillary, quote unquote, her emails. There was a large discussion taking place there with John Podesta
and Lawrence Rockefeller, the Rockefeller Initiative to bring out this information, where he encouraged Bill Clinton while he was still president. And I must tell you, I want to talk about some of my other projects too, but I know this is a particular interest to MUFON. Oh, first, so I don't forget, let me tell you that Ron James, who does MUFON television, who I respect immensely, I think he does a wonderful job. And Ron sat me down for many, many hours and interviewed me about the Roswell movie that I executive produced and co-wrote for Showtime. And we went through it scene by scene. And he's coming out with a video soon called Back to Roswell, which is really the glorified interview with me and many clips from the movie where I'm dissecting it and I'm taking it apart scene by scene, and I'm telling what the basis in fact was for every part of our film. Because our film, which came out in 94, was instrumental in breaking loose the Roswell saga and the whole concept of the government cover-up. They're denying us this information very deliberately. What are they concealing? So back to Roswell, he calls this. It's going to be over an hour, and it'll be released soon. I think it'll be released on MUFON TV. That'll be the first place to look for it. And I've looked it over.
I've seen the advertisements that Ron's done for it.
I think it came out very well, and I think that it'll provide a lot of information of interest, to MUFON members.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about your interest in UFOs and sort of the other interest that you have in paranormal things. And which gets back to our discussion about Forrest Ackerman. Yeah. And some things that happened with him. But you mentioned earlier in the interview about some things that you had seen or that you had experienced that caused you to think a little bit differently about how the world was constructed, I guess, right?
Well, when I worked for F. Lee Bailey on his syndicated show Lie Detector, and I had Dorothy Allison, the psychic from New Jersey, come aboard, she had helped a lot of police departments solve crimes, find missing bodies in murder cases. She had affidavits from these police departments commending her for all the help she had given. And we did a sequence on one of her cases, which was just absolutely extraordinary. You can't explain it by any rational thing. There was a 14-year-old girl who was murdered, and her body hadn't been found. And after everything else had been tried, Dorothy Allison was called in. She met with the parents, and she likes to touch some clothing that, the deceased had worn as a way to, build some kind of connection. And she begins blurting out things where she's visualizing where the body might be found. And she blurted out a whole series of clues. I'm not going to repeat the clues right now, but suffice it to say that over the next year, it's on Long Island, I think it was, the father of the murdered girl searched many, many locations trying to find a place that matched what Dorothy Allison had said. And finally he did. He found something where it matched very, very closely in many respects. And they didn't find the body there immediately, but I think it was within a period of months, the police brought dogs there, and they found his daughter's body in an oil drum in that location that matched everything Dorothy Allison had said. And Dorothy said she's getting the clues from the deceased. The spirit of the deceased is trying to tell her where the body can be found. Now, Dorothy Allison's not the only one who's done this. There are others who have, as I understand it, successfully done this kind of thing. So this opened up the door in my thinking, because you had to have some source of this information coming to Dorothy Allison. There was no coincidence here. And what could that be, if not from the spirit of the murder victim? Well, you try not to make too many leaps of supposition, but it opened up the door in my thinking. But look, that was 1983. I didn't come back to this subject until Forrest J Ackerman died. He passed away in December of 2008. He was an atheist. He didn't believe in any afterlife. He believed that when you die, it's like turning out a light bulb. It's over. But, there was something mischievous about him, and with a little twinkle in his eye, he would say, but, if it turns out I'm wrong, he says, if I wake up after I die to the great science fiction convention in the sky, tell you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to be very busy with reunions with all of my friends, like Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and George Powell and my dear wife, Wendane. He said, but, the party probably died down sometime, and then maybe I'll drop you a line. Oh, how'd you like that? I'd drop you a line. He said, but don't count on that. Don't count on it, right? He was mischievous. He pulled pranks. He liked word games. He always teased. So didn't take that seriously.
Because he was an atheist.
Until after he died, and he dropped me a line just like he promised, all right? I didn't expect that. I wasn't asking for it, but it wasn't just me. We had this huge tribute for him at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood a couple months after he died, March of 2009. And there were others that very, very strange things happened right after Fari died. It was like the Twilight Zone. Particularly these two Canadian filmmakers. Let's see, it's Ian Johnston and Mike McDonald made a film about Fari's life. And the day of the tribute, they went to his crypt and they rapped on his coffin playfully saying, hi, Fari. You know, we come down from Canada. We're going to show our movie at the tribute for you tonight. We miss you. We love you. Wish you were here. And within an hour of that, they said they received a message from him on their computer. Right? They explained what happened. And it wasn't just one thing that happened. It was on two different computers, all within a short space of time. Weird stuff happened with Ackerman's name on their computer. And even his childlike voice on a computer that had a photo of him as a child as the homepage. So, you know, I heard about this the day of the tribute. They talked about it, and I didn't expect anything. But it was a few days after that he dropped me a line, literally a line. I had a document that was just an ordinary type document. And it had been dry for a couple hours since it was printed. And when I'm out of the room, alone in the house, for 5 minutes, I come back and the document has been changed. And there's a line. I said, he dropped me a line. 4 words are now blacked out in the document neatly, precisely. And whether it's ink or I don't know what it is, but it's kind of black and it's still moist. And it's in 2 different levels of blackout. Like the first 2 words you can still kind of see through, but the other 2 words completely blacked out. You can't read them. You have to go to the computer, go to the original document to find out what the words were. I was scared to death, Richard. I was scared to death. I mean, you know, with the flying saucer incident, you know, I was looking at something from afar with my children. It was amazing. I found it exhilarating. There was no fear. But when this happened, there was fear. I was afraid. You know,
What were you afraid of?
I was afraid I was in the presence of a demon or something. You know, it's like I wasn't connecting with Fari at that moment. It's like, you know, the thing about pirates and the black spot? If you get a black spot, it means you're going to die soon, right? Yeah. So what am I afraid of? Okay, death, of course. I didn't know. But I treated the document as evidence, and I had a cousin who was the chairman of the chemistry department of Indiana University, Dr. J. Siegel, died about a year ago. He's one of the great forensic chemists in the world, written many, many textbooks. He said, you know, okay, he said, Paul, I'll investigate it. FedEx me the document. We'll get to work on it in my lab here. I said, FedEx it to you, Jay. What if FedEx loses it? You know, you think I'm going to take a chance this thing is going to disappear in the mail? No, I'm getting on a plane and I'm going to bring it and I'm going to hand it to you in your office. It's not going to be separated from me. It's not going to get lost. He began an investigation. It ended up involving 3 different universities, 2 different chemistry departments. Oh, he was so cocksure he'd be able to explain this, you know, at first. 3 years later, he and his colleagues are still working on it. They can't reproduce it. They can't figure out how it happened. They have no explanation for it. They use electron microscope. They dissect the chemistry. He explained to me in detail, and I put this into a movie, by the way. I made a film.
That's what I wanted to get to, was that you made a movie about this, a film about it. It's called The
I
Afterlife
brought my video
Project.
camera to the lab, and that began it. It began a movie. It became the Life After Death Project.
Yeah.
And then there was the Life After Death Project 2, which right now is at Amazon with a couple of my other movies. I want to let everybody know what they can find and where.
Sure.
But right now, only part 2 is up at Amazon, but I think part 1, is going up in a matter of days or weeks. I think it's all been approved. And it tells the whole story of the investigation, which just expanded and expanded and brought more and more convincing evidence, convincing to me and even to some skeptics, that there is something of us that survives death, that retains the personality. In Fari's case, even the sense of humor. And he connected with me afterwards because those 4 words related to him very, very specifically. I was able to discover that.
Tell us what the line was.
Oh boy, you want to use another 5 or 10 minutes of our conversation for that?
It's just, I find it fascinating. Because I've seen this film several times. I've watched it over and over again.
Let me just say that his closest companion during those final years was Jomo of Hawaii. And Jomo had an apparition of Fari coming to him after that great tribute and speaking to him. And the 4 words blocked out was a way of telling me that he had spoken to Jomo.
What did Jomo say?
Well, Joe tries to be skeptical, but he just shakes his head and says, you know what the expression MO means? Somebody's MO, it means
right,
it's what
sure. Modus operandi.
It's a modus operandi.
Right.
And his name is Mo. And he said, well, this was Fari's MO. That's what he would have done.
Right.
I don't know. I just can tell you that for the few years after Fari died, I felt like I was living in the Twilight Zone because it wasn't just this one incident. Incidents just kept happening and happening and happening. And so there's the movie, The Life After Death Project, part 1 and 2. And then there's the book I co-wrote with Dr. Gary Schwartz of the University of Arizona, Tucson.
That's the guy I wanted to talk to you about, because he's really developed a wonderful, apparently scientific, reproducible method of communicating with people who've passed on, right?
And you see some of that in the movie, The Life After Death Project, with his computer as he's trying to verify about Fari. I was going to say the book we co-wrote is called An Atheist in Heaven, and the subtitle is The Ultimate Evidence for Life After Death. And one of the people who reviewed it was nicely reviewed along with my film by the the Psychic Society of London. It's the society's been around for more than 100 years. It's predates the days of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who believed in spiritualism. But he said, or someone who reviewed it said, that reading my book, An Atheist in Heaven, was like trying to drink water out of a fire hose. Maybe you want a sip or two, but this is gushing at you, like a fire hose. That so much happened. So, until I was, until I was 1983, until I worked for the F. Lee Bailey Show and met Dorothy Allison, until I'm around 35 or so, nothing strange had happened to me in my life. A lot of neat stuff. I'd had a wonderful childhood, but nothing that people would say is,
paranormal or outside of the ordinary realm of experience.
No, but it happened to me, and it happened later in life.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy it did. Yeah. I'm very happy to have this kind of a worldview where it's all much more vast. And we're part of something much more complex than we can ever imagine, and with much more intelligence behind it than we can ever even begin to dream. I mean, people have called it God. They have called it spirit. they creationism, the idea that we were created by a vast intelligence that permeates this creation. And when I was younger, I would have said, come on, I'm not religious. But now I say, bring it on. No, bring it on. It's real. We are part of something. We are connected to something. It includes so many planets and solar systems and galaxies and life in so many forms and so many worlds. Even on this earth, life takes so many forms. And the communication with other realms, there is a lot of evidence for that. And 50, 100 years ago, no one would have believed that we'd all have cell phones. There'd be 1 billion cell phones on this planet, and you could instantly communicate with any one of those billion cell phones at the speed of light, that it's all connected by this vast web. Well, my belief now is everything's connected by this vast web and all life on Earth. And, as we destroy, living things on Earth, or whether it's the Amazon rainforest or whether we do, destructive things to our own planet, we're doing it to ourselves also. And not saying that we know how to solve all these problems we've created. I don't know that we do, but we need to be able to recognize them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at. And I made about 10 films. Before this is over, I want to tell people about some of the other films and where they can see them.
Certainly. Tell us right now where they can see some of your work.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about the most recent because I know a lot of my viewers today have kids, or you have grandkids. And I've been doing some wonderful things for children. And Amazon Prime released in September this year, 2020, my series for children called The Grand Kingdom of Cookie Land. So remember that. Look it up.
The Grand Kingdom
of Cookie Land.
Of Cookie Land, okay.
Yes, Cookie Land, one word. And it's 12 episodes, and it's done with puppets and children. So it has something in common with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, something in common with Sesame Street and the Muppets. And it's totally pure and innocent and clean and wonderful. It has this most wonderful song by Brian Lambert down in Cookie Land. Brian composed the music soundtracks for some of my films, including Jesus in India, Before We Say Goodbye, and The Sci-Fi Boys. So look for The Grand Kingdom of Cookie Land. If you have Amazon Prime, it's free there. Now, I've also I've co-created a children's book series called The Gimwits, Gimmwitts.
Yeah.
There's 4 adventure books, kind of like The Hobbit, beautifully illustrated by Melanie Joy Bacon, who designed our puppet theater for Grand Kingdom of Cookie Land. And they're so much fun. There is a website, thegimwits.com, and you can find those books at Amazon. So if you have kids, if you have grandchildren, please enjoy those. Let me tell you what else I've got at Amazon. Okay. My film, Marilyn Monroe Declassified, is still at Amazon Prime, and it deals with her life. It deals with the mystery of her death, and I think probably solves the mystery of her death, which I do not believe was by natural causes. There was a UFO connection with Marilyn Monroe and her connection with President John F. Kennedy, who, pillow talk and all of that. He revealed to her some things that were classified she wasn't supposed to know. It got her in trouble. She was being wiretapped because she was married to a noted American leftist communist, Arthur Miller, the playwright who authored Death of a Salesman. Mm-hmm. It's quite a story. Look for Marilyn Monroe Declassified.
I certainly will.
Also at Amazon, there's the Life After Death Project 2. There's Jesus in India. One of the great extraordinary experiences of my life was going to India with Edward T. Martin to make that movie. It's a wonderful film about the mystery of Christ's missing years, the 18 years unaccounted for in the New Testament. And we went to India on a journey to uncover whatever stories might lend evidence to the myths that are widely believed in India that Christ traveled to India during those missing years and more. So look for Jesus in India. There's another film I made called Before We Say Goodbye. This one is based on a stage play, has almost entirely a Hispanic American cast. Very popular movie on television throughout all of Latin America, thanks to NBC Universal. Before We Say Goodbye. It deals with the Virgin of Guadalupe. Any of you who are Catholic, particularly in the Southwest, will know the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe, who appeared in the year 1511 to a peasant, Juan Diego, and asked that a basilica or a church be built for her at the spot where she was appearing. And the story about that among Catholics, it includes many miracles, and there's physical evidence that accompanies that. I talk about the physical evidence in my life after death story with Forrest Ackerman. Well, Juan Diego had the image of this celestial visitor imprinted on his cactus cloak. It should have disintegrated in 30, 40 years. Well, it's 500 years later, and the cloak still has the image that was imprinted on it then. It hasn't deteriorated, and it's on display in the Basilica of the Virgin of Guadalupe in Mexico City. In my film, Before We Say Goodbye, we have scenes where we went there. We were permitted to film there. We were permitted to film with actors, even while Mass was going on in the church. This was really fascinating, and it's a wonderful story based on a stage play. It's not a documentary about this, but it's about Hispanic Americans and problems they deal with and questions of faith. And it also deals with the question of life after death and heaven and miracles. Yeah. So there you can see that at Amazon Prime. Now, one I've done that I'm most proud of, well, not the most, but very proud of, called The Sci-Fi Boys.
Yes.
This, I think, will end up on Amazon Prime. Right now, you can still find the DVD. This one won the Saturn Award as Best DVD of the year it came out. I think it was 2006 or 7. It's the history of special effects in movies, from the earliest days, primitive, black and white, silent films, up through Peter Jackson's King Kong. And Peter Jackson graciously and wonderfully participated in the movie as the host of the movie, which has so many of the top people in science fiction films, including George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg is in it, and Dennis Muren and Rick Baker and John Landis and Forrest J Ackerman and Ray Harryhausen. It's a classic. It really is a wonderful, for people that love those movies, it's something fantastic.
Yeah. So tell us about your relationship with MUFON, Paul.
Yes, it really, I think, started in, I think it was 1988. They had an international MUFON symposium in Nebraska. This was about a year after my sighting, and Donald Schmidt, who was then head of special investigations for the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, he suggested I go. I meet him there, and I heard the lectures, and was very, very, very impressed. I also met the skeptic Phil Klass there, who I think, he was just one of those, not just a debunker, but, a professional debunker, a debunker with a purpose. Yeah. As I say, there's a lot of people deliberately concealing information on this, and Phil Klass was no friend of UFO disclosure. Never heard a UFO story that he didn't hate.
Right. Or that he couldn't debunk.
Yeah, poorly. I was at the MUFON conference. I joined MUFON, So if that was 1988, that's about 32 years I've been a member of MUFON. I've gone to the international symposiums many times, and I've been a speaker at the international symposiums several times.
I saw your talk 2 years ago.
Even, yes.
UFOs in Hollywood.
You was very pleased to talk about the history of the UFO in the Hollywood film. And my point was to look at the films year by year, but also look at what was happening in terms of UFO reports each year, what was happening in the whole popular culture, how it all evolved. So MUFON is important, and it's a solid organization, and I think it contributes a lot to the field. And I hope one of these days there'll be a lot exposed and a lot explained. That right now, millions of your tax dollars are being used to hide it from you.
Yes.
So we hope for another era ahead.
Before we go, Paul, I want to talk to you about our mutual friend, Dr. Stanislav Ojak. And he made an appearance in your, I think it was part 2 of the Life After Death project, and you had him make some comments. Now, just for our audience's purposes, I actually interviewed Dr. Ojak some years ago, although I see him fairly often, and I had an interview with him last week on the MUFON podcast, but he was with Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff at SRI, along with Ingo Swann, and I was wondering what led you to use Dr. Ojak in your film. Why did you contact him, and what was the purpose for having him in your film?
I'm trying to remember who it was who introduced me to Stanislav Ojak. I don't remember who that person was right now, but they said that he had demonstrated some extraordinary psychic abilities and had also had experience with after-death contact with spirits that was credible. At some point, Stanislav invited me to come up to visit him. And I'm always forgetting whether he's in Montana or
Wyoming. He's with me in Wyoming. He's just across town. I see him all the time.
That's wonderful. I don't know how I forgot, but I flew up to Wyoming, and I stayed with him for a few nights, and I filmed him, and I heard his story, and I learned his evidence. So here's a few of the extraordinary things about Stanislav. You know, when you have a camera and you have a lens cap on it, the lens cap stops light from getting to the lens.
Yes.
You shouldn't be able to film anything. But Stanislav has a whole collection of photographs he's taken with the lens cap on the camera, where you're seeing not just what's in front of his eyes, but you're also seeing all kinds of strange things that suggest that you're kind of looking into another dimension, another world. You're seeing lights and paths of things that illuminate, that are moving in strange kinds of paths, leaving streaks on the film and creating all kinds of images. And he's done this in the presence of many witnesses, including scientists and engineers from Stanford, who have been with him when he's taken these pictures with a lens cap on the camera. No one can explain how this is physically possible, but it's real.
Yeah.
And I, with his permission, used some of his photographs in the Life After Death project too. Now, the other thing is, he says that he has had contact with deceased people. There's one woman in particular. I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but might have been Jamal or something like that. But
yeah, this is his deceased wife.
His deceased wife, he said, appeared to him as a like a living flesh and blood form in his bedroom, seated on his bed, talking to him. He could see the depression in the mattress, just as though she were really there. And when his wife came to the door and knocked, Jamal disappeared in the blink of an eye. You know, she'd gone, like she was never there. Even one of his close friends, I think it was someone in New Zealand, had a visitation from Jamal. So when you study the literature about life after death, you find quite a number of examples where people testify about someone deceased that they knew actually appearing to them as though flesh and blood. Strange, really, really, really strange, because some of these accounts are from very, very credible people, and always the spirit manifestation just disappears in that.
With respect to Dr. Ojak, I had the honor of appearing in one of his lens cap pictures. We formed a little group called the Institute for Human Cosmic Interaction some years ago with Dr. Sprinkle and a few other folks. And when we attended a conference in Phoenix, Stanislav was going around the room taking pictures with the lens cap on his camera, and he came up to take a picture of me and a couple of ladies that were there, and they said, "Oh, Stanislav, the cap's on your camera," and I said, "He knows."
He does know. He's a remarkable person. He's getting on in years now. He's a psychologist, not psychiatrist, correct?
Yeah, a clinical psychologist, PhD.
Clinical psychologist. Very, very learned, very helpful, very great soul.
Wonderful
and adherent to the beliefs of Baha'i, which she practices.
Yeah.
So, a few other things I could bring up before we have to say goodbye.
Certainly.
There are other movies I've made too.
We'd love to hear about them, Paul. All of them.
I'd like to mention. Well, there's one called The Artist and the Shaman, which is about my experience as an artist, as a painter, working with a shaman named Rahilio, who gives mystic tours in Sedona, Arizona. And The Artist and the Shaman was a summer I spent with Rahilio. I spent painting and exploring a mystery involving his son. It was a spiritual mystery involving his son. I won't go into the further details there, but I will say that you can find it online. If you Google Culture Unplugged, Artist, Shaman, it'll come up.
Okay.
It's a beautiful movie, absolutely beautiful music, and it is a Sedona story. It encapsulates Sedona, Arizona, a place I have been in love with for over 30 years. And I guess I can break the news here and now that I'm going to be departing Los Angeles soon to be a permanent resident of Sedona early next year. My wife and I have, we have a contract on a house in Sedona that's going to become our new primary residence, and we're very, very happy that we're going to be there. Spent more than half a lifetime in Los Angeles. Loved Los Angeles. In many respects. My wife was senior vice president of special projects for over about 25 years at NBC. It's NBC Universal, but she was Universal Pictures. She did the premieres. And before that, she was 10 years at Columbia Pictures. And I made so many independent films there. Roswell, released by Showtime. That was not independent, that was a Showtime film. But then my independent films were picked up by NBC Universal for international television. And it's been a very, very fortunate career. Another thing I've loved about Los Angeles is being a full-time member of the Magic Castle in Hollywood.
You're a magician.
I became a magician. I've performed. I love to do magic. Well, I'll be an out-of-state member of the Magic Castle then from on, and it'll be okay. I've learned so much there, I've really grown to love it. And also, as I said, I'm a painter, I'm an artist, the Artist and the Shaman. My website is www.pauldavids, and then a little hyphen, and then artist.com. You'll see about 300 of my paintings there. I've done so many paintings. They're in galleries. I've actually done 7 coffee table art books of my paintings now.
Holy moly.
To find those, Google Blurb, because BLURB or blurb.com is, that's where they're published. And then my name, Paul Jeffrey Davids, and the word art. And all 7 of these books will come up. They're kind of expensive because they have a lot of color and they're print on demand, but you can get the PDF file of them for just a few dollars and see it on your computer, the whole thing, or get an ebook. And that's my career as an artist. So I've had these multiple themes going on in my life. The art, I'm so close emotionally, spiritually to the Impressionists of France of a century ago. And then, actually it's getting to be 2 centuries ago now. And the great magicians, the great filmmakers, the tradition of special effects. You know, I've had a part of it all in my life. I never, ever expected to be a proselytizer for the knowledge that flying saucers are real. They're from other realms, whether it's dimensional or other planets. I don't have answers except to say they're real. And there's a lot of official people in high positions who don't want you to know it. But they're beginning to give up on that, I think. It's wearing a little thin for them. This cover-up is just unraveling at the seams. Ever since we got the video camera and so many thousands of people have photographed these. And now we're even getting some admissions, even from former Senator Harry Reid and other people in prominent positions. It will come out, but, you know, they don't think that it will help the domestic tranquility, you know? And isn't that what our Constitution says, that, you know, or is it the Declaration of Independence, to promote the domestic tranquility?
Yeah.
So, you know, they're not trying to rouse people up, but it's real, and we might as well know something about our place in the universe. So all of it's been a part of my wonderful life. I've had a wonderful, long-lasting marriage. We're going on 49 years of marriage.
Beautiful.
I have 2 wonderful children and 2 grandchildren. And life is sweet.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate it, Paul. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you appearing on the show today. I can't tell you how much.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure for me to talk about all these things and to share them. You know, because I have an enthusiasm for it all, for it all. I have an enthusiasm for it all, and, you know, this great zest for life. And I'm not a young man anymore, but I am a young-spirited older man.
Well, I really appreciate you being here, Paul. I really do. I really do. And I'll be back in just a few minutes with some afterthoughts.
You are not alone. Thousands of people all over the world have sightings of UFOs per month. MUFON is the place to report them. Since 1969, MUFON has been investigating UFO reports and providing this information to the public. Our aim is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. Support UFO research. Join MUFON today.
You are listening to the official podcast of the Mutual UFO Network.
Paul Davids is a true Renaissance man. Not just an artist and a filmmaker and a writer, but one of those rare individuals who possesses the unique ability to communicate with others in a very fundamental and emotional way. And what does he tell us? That everything in the universe is connected to everything else. We are all an integral part of an underlying tapestry of life, each moment woven into the fabric of existence. We should all be thankful that there are people like Paul Davids in the world, those who carry the glowing torches in a world otherwise filled with darkness. Thank you once again for joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. And remember to read Ray Fowler's latest book, UFOs, The Ultimate Abduction, available at Amazon.com. I'll see you next week, right here on the official MUFON podcast.